My mic's not working. Hello? Hello?
Testing, testing. I don't think any of them are on.
Hello? Okay. Okay. Is it work? Yeah. All right. Good evening. The time is 5:31 p.m. and this special budget hearing is hereby called to order. We have the presence of a quorum and the meeting has been duly called and notice of the meeting has been posted for the time and manner required by law. We will have our 2019-2020 budget and proposed tax rate. We will conduct our public meeting to discuss the proposed 1920 school district budget and proposed tax rates. Dr. Dupree.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you know, this meeting is kind of the culmination of many meetings we've been conducting multiple times each month for the last probably 5 months. With the legislative session, the staff has provided numerous updates on the budget, and last week we presented a lengthy update following the passage of House Bill 3. So tonight we're doing the official public meeting. We'll also accept public comment at the end of the meeting before the board actually considers approving a budget later this evening. So I'll turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Steve Bassett.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree. So yes, it's been a long road. One of the most interesting budget sessions I've seen, or budget processes, in the past 16 years, thanks to House Bill 3 and our friends in the legislature. You're not going to see any new numbers with regard to the proposed budget itself for 1920, but based on your feedback, we have done some work on out years forecasts, kind of with and without raises, so Brian will show you some of that. I can tell you that we did receive some good news at the end of the day. Thursday, the TEA published their preliminary list of numbers for Hurricane Harvey relief. We were expecting to hear something in June. I was told it was actually going to be later than this time. We're pending. The preliminary number for us is a one-time funding of $21.9 million. I was expecting it to be in 8 figures. I wasn't, I thought it was going to be in the tens or the teens. I just really didn't know how they're going to calculate, and I still don't know how they calculated that out. Friends at Katie actually are at 40 million, and so the whole list is out there. But 21.9 million for us, is certainly good. We'll learn more about how that was calculated. But again, that is one-time money. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brian. He'll speak about the general fund, including the forecasts, and then I'll wrap it up with debt service and child nutrition.
All right, thank you, Steve. Good evening, Mr. President, members of the board, Dr. Dupree. The proposed budget for the district has been prepared based on state statutes, and it meets all the statutory requirements related to truth in taxation. The notice of public hearing was published in 3 local papers on June the 5th, the Fort Bend Star, Fort Bend Independent, and Fort Bend Herald. And that's at least 10 days prior to this evening's hearing, so we do meet the statutory requirements. The information was also concurrently placed on the district's website at the same time, and the hearing this evening will focus on the general, debt service, and child nutrition funds, which are required by statute to be adopted by the board. All 3 of those funds have been prepared on a functional basis to comply with state reporting requirements, so as we walk through the budget, we will show you what that looks like as well. The general operating budget for the district for 2019-20 is proposed to be $716.9 million. That represents expenditures per student of $9,283, and that's a 7.8% increase over the 2018-19 year-end estimate. We're assuming enrollment of 77,226 students, which is based on the moderate growth proposed by the district's demographer that was shared with the board back in February. These are the major budget assumptions for the general fund. We have average daily membership of 76,249, Water growth of 95,189, which is a 2.7% growth above the current year. Average daily attendance of 96.5%. And as we've shared with you previously, we're looking at 5% property value growth, which is based on the preliminary certified values received from the Fort Bend Central Appraisal District. On the state aid side, we're using current law. However, we are projecting that we will have the transitional formula grant, which is 3% above current law, and that will result in about $18 million in revenues to the district over a 5-year period. That does expire at the end of 5 years. We have a free and reduced count of just under 34,000 students, which is about 44% of our total student population. And then finally, on approved staffing, the board has previously approved 469 positions totaling 28.3 million, and that includes classroom teachers and the special education positions that were, again, previously approved by the board in February, March, as well as April. And then finally, there's a compensation adjustment of $24.9 million that's included in the budget. That proposal is before the board for consideration, and those numbers are included in the budget for 2019-20. As stated, the budget has to be prepared on a functional basis, and this is the breakdown of those functional expenditures. The table below shows what the actual breakdown is, and over the next several slides, I'll review with you what those functional areas are in more detail. But this breaks it out between instructional support, district operations, and central administration. Each of the areas that are included under the instructional support, this can be considered our core business. These are the classroom teachers, principals, classroom aides, and all of the functional support areas that support the individual campuses. It totals $578.9 million and is about 81% of our total expenditures. And again, these are going to be the items that directly impact students in classrooms during the school year. District operations make up about 17% of our total expenditures at $120 million. The major expenditures in these functions include utilities, police support, building maintenance and repairs, lawn maintenance, IT services, student transportation, as well as property appraisal services from the Central Appraisal District. And what I will say is we like to say this is the area that literally keeps the lights on in the district. The final functional area is going to be central administration, which represents 2% of total expenditures at just under $18 million. This includes district leadership such as the superintendent, the finance component, purchasing, human resources, legal, and community relations. These are all integral components of running the operations of the district. And as you look at it as an overall percentage of full-time equivalents or the number of personnel, this is 1% of total district employees are contained within Function 41 or administration. Some separate notes that we have are specifically related to the additions that are included in the budget for the 2019-20 school year. Although, as we've gone through the process, we have explained that there are severe constraints placed on the district by House Bill 3. We are still making investments within the district on key programs that are our district goals and objectives. There's $20.3 million that's allocated specifically to these initiatives, and I'll start in the upper left-hand corner. For social, emotional, and trauma-informed care, we do have additional mental health counselors, positive behavior system support, as well as behavior support for Tier 3 type of behavior issues on campuses. On the collaborative communities, the board recently adopted a new specific policy related to how we want to interact with the community. There is the addition of an executive director that will begin walking us towards the build-out of that program that will support that specific program. And then you're aware that we added additional EDGE stipends at the secondary and some additional campuses in the Willow Ridge and Marshall feeder patterns. That also added some additional support in terms of activity-based learning teachers, school improvement, and again, those stipends specific to those campuses where they previously had not had those that should aid in retention and recruitment. Full-day pre-K is another large initiative included in the budget that I'll spend a few moments on in a slide or two. And then the Early Literacy and Early Intervention Academy are also being expanded. The existing pre-K students that were enrolled at that academy those campuses will be allowed to extend forward into the kindergarten level through first grade. The additional staff members to support that have been added and are part of the proposed budget this evening. And then Gifted and Talented is an area that is particularly a board focus as well as something important to the community. A GT director has been added, as well as stipends for teachers on campuses that participate in the program to help begin to make improvements and enhance that program. And then the early college, high school, and P-TECH, there were additional teaching staff as well as deans of instructions for those campuses that will be receiving that include Willow Ridge, Hightower, and Marshall. So that will be a program that's included as part of the budget that's in the proposed budget. Special education, I'll spend a few moments on the slide, but we have, or on the next slide, but we have included the additional resources related to growth there. And then finally, a threat assessment team is something the board acted on in this fiscal year, but you may recall we included partial year funding. We've annualized those costs, and those resources are included in the 19-20 proposed budget. Excuse me. As I mentioned, the investments in special education are due to continued identification of students who are eligible for SPED services. You all probably recall that the state artificially capped SPED enrollment at 7%. That was discontinued in 2016 when the federal government found that the state was in violation of federal laws. And as a result, over the last several years, we have seen SPED increases by about 680 students per year since 2017 through 2019. By 2020, this upcoming school year, we do estimate special education population to be about 10% of total enrollment. And if you look at the national average, about 13% of students enrolled are typically identified as special education. We would expect to reach that threshold probably over the next 2 to 3 years. So we do expect this growth to continue over the next several years as well. I mentioned that full-day pre-K is included within the proposed budget. There's $9.1 million specifically for full-day pre-K. House Bill 3 does mandate that for eligible students, and we would expect an enrollment of about 2,800 students beginning in fiscal year 20 based on the demand that will be created for that. We have 80 new full-time pre-K teachers and 86 additional aides for regular preschool. And there's also 7 teachers and 4 aides, or 14 aides for the preschool program for children with disabilities, or PPCD. So those staff members are included as part of this as well. Enrollment for the full-day program started June 10th, which was last Monday, and will continue through the opening of school. There is a possibility that demand will exceed what capacity we have and the teachers were able to find, and staff is working on the ways that we would address that as we go into the 19-20 school year. Before I review the impact of 19-20, I would like to point out how we expect to end the 18-19 school year. And as we've previously shared, we do expect that things for 18-19 will end better than what we expected. We're expecting a surplus of about $7.5 million, and we had previously expected we would use about $5.9 million in economic stabilization. However, we expect to end the year with $209 million in fund balance, which is 96 days, which is above the fund balance requirement of having 90 days in reserve. And some of that will be available to offset an expected deficit in 19-20 that we would utilize economic stabilization for. So moving into the 19-20 year, you see that revenues are projected at $704.8 million, total expenditures $716.9 million, and again, this includes those items that we have just talked through. Other sources includes $2 million, which is a transfer in from our extended learning fund, and then finally, the use of economic stabilization, like I mentioned, there's $10 million that is available to offset the expected difference between revenues and expenditures. Overall, we expect to end the year with a fund balance of $199.1 million, which is 90 days fund balance requirement, so we are meeting our operating reserve. In addition to the current outlook, we have prepared a 3-year outlook. The assumptions for that include property values continuing to grow at 5%. We are assuming that we're receiving the transition grant, which is based on 3% above current law. On our expenditure side, we have new teaching staff for campus growth, which is based on projected enrollment growth. Those numbers are provided by the district's demographer, PASA. We have the early college high school teachers to support the program growth for 2020 through 2023. And then, as I previously showed you or told you, we are expecting special education to continue to grow over the next several years. And we have roughly $4 million included in the budget to account for the expected increase in identification there. And then finally, as we continue to experience healthcare inflation, there are funds set aside to specifically manage those costs as well. We have created two versions of the forecast. As we previously shared with the board, there's one with a 3% compensation adjustment for years 2021 through 2023, and that's assuming that we make those adjustments to remain competitive with other local districts. However, we've also prepared the forecast without those increases so you can see what that looks like, and I'll show you that in just a moment. But moving on, in 2021, we've included the startup costs and support personnel for elementary 52 as well and 53, and then also the startup costs associated with the new high school opening as well. When we look at the 3-year outlook with the 3% raises, this is the slide that we previously shared with you. But as you look in year 2023, we do move considerably below our fund balance operating requirement. That's due to the compounding of that 3% annual adjustment being made this year and each successive year. That adds up over time. However, as you've asked us to do, we also looked at what would happen if we had no raises included beyond what's included for 2021, and you can see there is a marked improvement over what we showed you previously. So what we would expect in years 2021, 22, and 22, 23, there is a slight deficit where we would show ourselves below fund balance policy. However, as Steve mentioned, we have not incorporated the impact of the $21 million from the Harvey hold harmless that's in there. Once that is done, we would expect that those numbers to improve and we would be within the 90-day fund balance policy requirement. And again, what I would say, as we've said before, is that any time that we bring forward a budget to the board, the budget would also always be balanced within the 90-day fund balance policy requirement unless we were specifically otherwise indicated or directed by the board. However, that's not something we would necessarily expect. So again, anything we would bring forward for final consideration would always be balanced to 90 days. We show you this just to show what things look like at this given end time based on what we know. But other than that, the forecast is again based on a set of assumptions and does not reflect what we would ultimately bring forward to the board other than the current fiscal year that we're asking you to approve. Moving into the 1920 debt service fund. The debt service fund currently is expected to end with a surplus of $13.7 million and a fund balance of just under $80 million. For 1920, revenues are estimated at $117 million and expenditures at $105 million. The expenditures are for debt service payments on the district's outstanding principal and interest. Overall, we're expecting a budgetary surplus of $12 million at the end of fiscal year 1920. However, the debt service payments that we make are made in February and August, so there will be August payments made. And once those August payments are made, the fund balance as of August 31st is expected to be $20 million based on making those required debt service payments. So now that we've discussed both the debt service and general funds, we can review the tax bill impact on an average residence. Based on the outcome of House Bill 3, the maintenance and operation tax rate is expected to be compressed from $1.06 to 99 cents. And that's a compression of 7 cents. And on the debt service side, or our income and sinking, we do expect to increase the tax rate there by 2 cents, and that's based on the voters authorizing up to 3 pennies based on the passage of the 2018 bond. So based on the average taxable value of a residence of $261,013, the tax rate of $1.27, which is down 5 cents from last year, the average tax bill would total $3,315, which is a $45.54 increase from the prior year, or about $3.80 per month. For the 2019-20 Child Nutrition Fund, the final fund is expected, this is the final fund to be reviewed this evening, and we expect to end the year with a surplus of about $300,000 in that fund. This results in an ending fund balance of about $4.42 million. And for 1920, based on our expected participation, there's revenues of $31.5 million and operating expenditures of $30.9 million, which will result in a surplus of about $600,000. Ending fund balance would be just over $5 million in that case. So we have reviewed all funds that the board is required to adopt. This evening, a public hearing on the budget and tax rate is scheduled in compliance with truth and taxation laws. At the meeting that follows the public hearing, the board will be asked to consider the 2019-20 budget, the year-end budget amendment, and the fund balance resolution, all of which are included as part of the budget. The staff expects to receive the certified tax roll in July, and at that point, we would begin to make the process for the final tax rate adoption that occurs in September. And in the interim, in August, we would make, we have Chapter 41 choice selection on here, but we believe that that has been retitled, but you would be asked to make a decision on how to handle recapture, which we are not expecting to have that problem for at least another 5 to 6 years based on House Bill 3. That concludes the information that I have to share related to the budget for 1920. And I don't know if Steve had anything he needed to add.
Just jump to back to the last slide if you don't mind, Brian. So one thing that we should have added for July is, based on the discussion last time, we'll be bringing an updated staffing item to talk about the pre-K staff that we'll need. That'll be a staffing item. There'll be a few other miscellaneous positions that'll be part of that, and some redirects. So that'll be for discussion in July. But the big rocks in that item will be pre-K. So you can expect that. Whether or not we do a budget amendment, for the Harvey money at that time, I'm not sure. It's probably more likely it would be better in August, because hopefully we'll have the comp ed revenues by then. So it really doesn't do us a lot of good to change the budget just for that Harvey number per se. But anyway, we will. There will be a budget amendment. There usually is one in September because we have the PO roll. Okay, we're usually doing the first budget amendment then. But if we know about the comp ed numbers that are based on the census data from the federal government, we'll bring that sooner than later. And that's all we have.
Okay. And Mr. President, I'll turn it back over to you for any questions the board may have and to conduct the public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Gwynn. We appreciate the presentation. Mr. Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine, and thank you, Mr. Gwynn and Mr. Bassett. And I would just like to say that, yes, first of all, thank you, Mr. Bassett, for the great lengths you went to, traveling to Austin numerous times to advocate on behalf of Fort Bend ISD, because while House Bill 3 was historic, not all school districts fared the same when it came to revenue. Charter schools, for example, fared quite well. And I would just like to remind everyone that charter schools don't have publicly elected trustees, and that the United States fought a war of independence with Great Britain based in no small part on taxation without representation. So people who support charter schools should remember that they don't have elected public trustees, and they really have little recourse, in my view, and it's taxation without representation. And so I'm hoping the $21.9 million for Hurricane Harvey bears out, and that they actually pay us that, and that they don't call us up and say, well, we made a mistake, sorry. So that's welcome news. But also, I wanted to just comment to your point, Mr. Gwynn, on the special education. Actually, it was the current Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, who is a charter school proponent, who spanked the state of Texas and fined the state of Texas $216 million for their failure to identify special needs children. And that's why the number is growing. And now they've had to reduce that cap, and then we've always had to deal with that, and we're dealing with it now. But also, I wanted to point out that our central administration, the overall cost of that is 2% of the total budget, and the FTEs, or the employees, is 1% of the total amount of employees employed by the school district. And the TEA has ways to measure central administration, campus administration, everything, 8 ways from Sunday. And I'm sure we'll be getting into that when we have our efficiency audit. But I'm pretty sure we're well within TEA guidelines on that, which means that we're running a pretty tight ship. And this board has always been very fiscally conservative, but I think that we intend to invest in our children, and the best way to do that is invest in our teachers and take care of our teachers and the people who support them, which is why we're going beyond what House Bill 3 requires, which is just to give raises to teachers and librarians and counselors and give them to all the people who work so hard to support our teachers and take care of everything else. And then I also want to point out that I recall some slides that you presented in the past, Mr. Bassett, that showed over the last 22 years, our property tax growth has fallen below 2.5% or 3%, maybe 3 times in 22 years. And now it's projected to be 5%, and yet we're going to be capped at, is it 3.5%? Is that the new cap? But they've given us, did I understand you correctly, they've given us some transition money to help get us over that hump?
Yes.
Okay. And now, in the past, Mr. Bassett, your job, in my view, is similar to Glenn Hagar's job in that you have to project revenue for the district 12 months out in order to set a budget, but really beyond that, as you've done, so we know what the cumulative effect of giving raises are. And Glenn Hagar has the same challenge, except he's got to project it 3 years out, and that's based in large part on what property tax growth is going to do. And heretofore, you could contact Glenn Whitehead, who's going to be retiring, and I hope the local CAD appraisal board doesn't change too much, but you could contact him and ask him what property values are going to do. And then that information would be reviewed and discussed and buttoned up and sent to the state of Texas Comptroller's Property Tax Division, who would then certify that 12 months in arrears. And now I'm understanding that that effort is going to be transferred to the TEA, who has never done this before. Never. And it's going to be done in the current year, which is going to make your job doubly hard. Frankly, I just don't know how they're going to do it. But that's what they are going to do. And anyway, I understand this. And the last comment I would like to make, Mr. Gwynn, is that if we've got $716 million in our maintenance and operation, I think I heard you say roughly $100 million in our debt service and about $31 million in child nutrition. So we've got a combined budget of north of $840 million a year.
Correct.
Yeah. So, okay, it's a pretty big operation we're dealing with here. All right, well, I really don't have any other questions except to say thank you very much for your hard work on this and the sleepless nights and putting everything together, especially when it came down to House Bill 3 not even being signed until the late afternoon of Memorial Day. So you didn't have Memorial Day off. You were working on this budget and everything else. So we do appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Mrs. James?
Thank you, Mr. Burdine, and thank you, Mr. Gwynn, for a nice presentation and all your hard work. If we could look at slide 16, I guess I wanted to say thank you for putting that slide together, because I was one of the people who was asking about that. So I appreciate that, just so we can sort of see what we're looking at. Now, are you saying on this, in comparison to the previous 3-year outlook or the other 3-year outlook on the previous slide, that the only difference is that you didn't include the raises going out those 3 years? Is that correct?
That is correct. We just included it for the 1920 year.
The compensation package that's on our agenda for tonight is what's included in 1920. Okay, so so thank you, and that's close to $25 million, as I understand it.
Yes.
Okay, so that's great. And then, did I also hear, I wasn't clear on the Hurricane Harvey one-time payment. Mr. Rice mentioned it, you guys mentioned it. So is there a placeholder in the 1920 budget now, or we have no placeholder in there at all?
It's not in there right now. I mean, we just found out about it Thursday, and it's listed as preliminary, and so we're expecting it to maybe change, but It's going to
Okay.
be material once we know the final number.
Right, okay, so that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't, I just wanted to understand where we were in considering that, whether it was considered in there or not. So I think that's wise to not count on that, as Mr. Rice said, until we actually see the check, the e-check or whatever they send these days. Okay, that concludes my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. James. Mrs. Tolsan?
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. So I have a couple extra questions, and then maybe a couple of comments. So on our, sure. On our child nutrition budget, it looks like, what slide is that? 21. So our fund balance is going to be $5 million at the end of next year. Are we in a position, again, as we were a few years ago, where we're going to have to spend down some of that money? What are the federal regulations around that?
So it's 3 months of fund balance. I haven't done that calc, but we're still below 3 months. We do expect to overtake that at some point, but we are going to be able to, there are some new guidelines in place to be able to charge that fund more for indirect costs. And so we are going to be doing that in the future. That'll help us with keeping that number at that three or below. And there's other investments we can make as well.
Okay, so we're below the 3 months that we're allowed to have.
Yes.
Okay. So I just want to, I did this in the last meeting, and I just want to say it again for this budget hearing, that slide 19. So I agree with Mr. Rice, and I appreciate all the work that you guys have put into this, trying to figure out House Bill 5, and Steve especially for all your time and testifying when, in the end, we did get the transition money. But all of that for a $45 annual savings. $45. That's what y'all can expect. That's what we all can expect, $45. While having a 2.5% property growth cap. So I don't see this as the big reform that we were hoping for personally. And it's been very complicated. So I did want to reiterate my appreciation for all your work, and not only making sure that our teachers are well compensated and are given raises over and above what House Bill 3 says to give, but also bringing us a budget that invests in priorities such as literacy, special education, the EDGE programs, and a lot of the things that this board, trauma-informed care, the things that we've been talking about the last few years. To reiterate something that Mr. Rice said, and even to put it into further perspective, the over $200 million in penalties and fines is not just for failing to identify children, it's also for failing to spend money that was allocated to Texas, which is another problem that we're facing that a lot of people don't understand, is that TEA is not spending the money that it has been given. And it's because of the laws that are on the books. And I talked about this some last time too. And so we've got to start letting our legislators know that we expect those laws to be changed so that money can be allocated to school districts. Because what is our gap going to be in the next couple of years, Steve?
In
For
terms of,
special education, gap in funding?
well, I mean, it's going to be, what is it, like,
Can't remember the exact
20
dollar amount. It's
21,
close to 20 million.
21 to 25 million. It's a big number, and that's
Yes.
per year. Per year.
Yeah, once those costs are in, and they will be recurring. We expect them to be, sure.
Exactly. So, we don't have not that we would have a choice, but we don't have a choice in educating children with disabilities in special education. And it's underfunded, and the gap is going to be over 20 million, and Texas is sending money back. So we just need to think about that. Texas is sending money back, and Fort Bend ISD alone is going to have an over $20 million per year gap. So I just wanted to reiterate those points because I'm very proud of the work that was done this year. I'm relieved that we've been able to work it out and keep our fund balance. but I fear that the next few years are going to be a struggle trying to make sure that the ends meet on our budget. So thanks for your work.
Thank you, Mrs. Tossan. Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you, sir. I just want to spend a lot of time last week clarifying and re-clarifying. I want to do it one more time. So the 2.5% cap goes into effect in September. Is that correct? Or this year?
No, it does not go into effect for this tax rate and what you're seeing here. Okay, it doesn't go into effect until the 2020 tax year.
Okay.
So next year.
Okay. So we're still going to be able to use that 5% or whatever the final number.
Right, that
Okay.
helps us. That helps us now because of the based on it's really we're supposed to be saying old law because House Bill 3 is
Right.
in law now. So that old law is still based on the prior year values and that gain of that 5%. So we're still able to benefit from that, and we will, as long as we're in that transition funding. What it's really going to do is it's just going to impact that slide because when we get capped, they're just going to put in the amount that we're capped, and it's not on a per student basis. It actually has nothing to do with students. It's going to be based on whatever that capped amount is, and then they're going to force compression to equal that amount, and then they'll put the amount that they're supposed to contribute into that local share portion of the state formula. And I could dig up that slide for you at another time if you really want to see that again. But that's how the math is going to work. Of course, the concern of that long term is whether or not they'll continue to be able to fund those reductions in the local share for all school districts.
Okay, so starting 2021 then that's when the cap will start to affect us, or we're still going to be
it'll
subject
impact us
to
next
that?
year. 2020, it'll impact us next year, and I expect it. I mean, if we have 5% growth, which I mean that's actually what we're assuming on the dent side. If that happens again, we will have more tax compression. But how much exactly? I'm not sure. There's some formulas that we still have to work out because I haven't seen the math, an example of it yet.
So the taxpayers will see the compression in the reduced rates for the whole $45 here, right? Which is about what, $4 a month?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. But they're gonna somehow hold us harmless.
Yes.
Okay.
That's in the law.
Okay. And then the only other question I had, because everybody else hit all the other points, the expansion of the Early Literacy Center and Early Intervention Academy, that's going to take place 2021. Deanna, is that something you can just touch on exactly where we're expanding?
Yes, for the next school year for 1920, we will be expanding the number of kindergarten classrooms in the Early Literacy Center in the Willow Ridge feeder pattern, as well as our kinder cohort will be moving up to first grade, and we'll be taking on all of the pre-K students just as we did last year. This year in the Early Literacy Center. So that's the extent of our expansion. If you remember, our initial implementation this year has been primarily the students in the Ridgemont feeder pattern with a few opt-in students from the other elementaries. So this year, all of our pre-K students are rising up to kinder, and predominantly I would say that 90% of them have opted to stay in kinder at the Early Literacy Center. So that's where the expansion is this year.
So it's not going to expand into another feeder pattern this year?
Not yet.
Okay. When do you think we'll see that?
Well, we'll be working on a planning year over the course of the 1920 school year to determine whether it's feasible for us to expand to another feeder pattern for the 2021 school year.
Okay. So to the budget then, have any of these thoughts been incorporated into?
Not into that forecast, and so in order to accomplish that kind of work, that's what's going to be driving the TRE.
Okay.
And so it's that, and there's a whole list of other things,
Right.
in terms of investments that we feel are needed as administration, and we'll be needing to talk about those over the next 16 months.
Okay. All right. Thank you both.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Mrs. Haliger.
Thank you. I think Mr. Rosenthal asked a few of my questions, but I just wanted to make sure I was totally clear because this presentation was slightly different than last month. just slightly. I think we introduced slide number 16. And this, sorry, not last month, but last week's presentation.
Right.
We introduced slide 16, and I think what confused me a little bit was the no raises. For me, in my mind, the no raises wasn't even an option for us. And so I was expecting to see more of the, I guess, the impacts of why we needed a TRE, because in slide 15, you showed slide 15 last week, correct?
Yes.
And so when I look at the 3 years out, I think I asked the question of how do we get this from out of red, and in order to do that is to highlight the fact that the TRE must be done to get us out of the red, because the no raises, slides number 16, is not even an option for us.
Yes, ma'am.
So, yeah, so that's what kind of confused me a little bit, understanding why we had this particular slide versus showing the need for the TRE. So that was it.
And if I may, related to that, because the initial projections that we did were based on a 4% adjustment. When we moved to 5%, there's still some calculations behind the scene we need to do to determine what we need to do on the TRE. Those calculations haven't been completed, but we are working to get those completed so we could see what that would look like in terms of what tax rate would need to be maintained in order to support those raises.
Yeah, and I think there's still some other variables that need to go into defining what would need to be in that TRE in the next, like you said, next 16 months. But just to make sure that we get out, when we look at the projections, to get out of this red, we have to have a TRE. Correct?
That is correct.
Okay, yeah, just want to highlight that, yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Helliger. I appreciate all the comments from our fellow trustees. I had just one quick question before we move on to public comment. Mr. Bassett, do you see if we pass the TRE, will that affect our future bond rating?
If we pass the TRE,
If TRE passes, will that affect our bond rating?
No, sir, it would not. I mean, it would actually help because it would help with the cash flow. Because they look at the general fund in addition to the fund balance for the debt service fund, but they look at the total financial picture for the district, and so the TRE will have an impact because they'll be comparing how our revenue compares with other districts around us, and they gauge that with competitiveness and charters. I mean, it's the whole package, the whole thing. So having a positive TRE will help maintain the positive bond ratings that we have. Good.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the presentation, Mr. Gwynn and Mr. Bassett. I know there's a lot of hard work that goes into this and many, many hours behind the scenes that no one even sees. So thank you very much. We will now be moving on to our portion of the meeting where we take comments and taxpayers' views on the proposed 2019-20 school district budget, the proposed debt service tax rate, and the proposed maintenance and operation tax rate for the 2019 year. Did we have anybody that would like to make a comment? All right. We will now move on.
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah. I will now need a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
This meeting is adjourned, but before we break here, we need at least 5 minutes to get the microphones and whatever the audio equipment needs to be changed for the next meeting. So let's start back at 6:20 if we can. Thank you.